Hello and welcome, my name is Crash, and it's been about 4 years since the first trans main character of Weekly Shonen Jump hit the magazine. Stop Ibari-kun is a manga from 1981, and today we're gonna be talking about all that manga holds now, almost 4 years after its debut. For context, this is Shonen Jump before it was the de facto manga magazine. This is Jump before the golden age of battle shonens, before JoJo, before Dragon Ball, Fall Saint Seiya, and even before Okudo no Ken. Yet don't misunderstand, Jump was still part of the mainstream landscape of the manga industry, just not as big as it would be in the years following the end of Ibari-kun, which is why it's still amazing that it had a transgender character as their main character. There was no precedence of this that I could find. Sure, there's some shoujo manga that did come before it, but as a shonen, it was definitely trailing new paths. And let's be real, if you are planning on reading Ibari-kun now, there's likely to be two possible reasons as to why. Either you want to get into some more Jump classics, or you want to read more manga about the LGBT community. Or both, which was definitely the case with me. This video is done with that in mind. Firstly, I'm going to tackle how this manga handles those topics and how I feel if they did it well or not. And afterwards, I'm going to just discard that part and focus on how the manga has aged, and if it's enjoyable to read in general. So, before we move into the art part, a disclaimer. I'm not trans myself. As a matter of fact, I'm a heterosexual cis guy, so if you are non-binary or gay or any member of the LGBT community, and especially of course if you are trans yourself, you might think this manga is more or less offensive than I thought. And I think that's natural. So if you did, please let me know in the comments below about your experience with the manga, because I wouldn't mind having a conversation about it and just learn about, other points of views as well. But jumping into the manga, Stop Ibari-kun is all about the story of Kosago Sakamoto, who after becoming an orphan is adopted by the Yakuza family Hoozora. Upon arriving, Kosago falls in love with the most beautiful of the four girls, until he finds out that she is actually a boy. Throughout the manga, Sakamoto will find himself in various adventures in school as Ibari presents herself as a girl there, and almost nobody knows her secret, and our main characters try to keep it that way. The thing we should have in mind, however, is that, again, Ibari-kun was released in 1981, and it definitely shows in the way a lot of the cast talks about Ibari. These characters are consistently trying to make Ibari stop dressing as a girl. That's why the title is Stop Ibari-kun, and everyone that does know that she's trans calls her a he. And of course, that opens another can of worms, which is Ibari trans or are they a cross-dresser? The manga focuses heavily on the clothing that Ibari has, often stealing from her sister, but Ibari herself always claims to be a girl, so I see her as a trans. And the cool thing about Ibari-kun's portrayal of trans people is Ibari herself. She is a badass, very confident in who she is, and never lets anyone else throw her down. Even when called a pervert, a boy, even when asked to dress more manly or behave normally, Ibari always leaves the room with her head high up, and she is overall just badass, strong, and the best character in the entire series. And this kinda holds true for the other very few LGBT characters that do pop up. They're all strong and confident of their own identity, and people throwing them off doesn't seem to make them want to stop from being who they are. And of course, this is a great message. You should be true to who you are, and if people don't like it, fuck them. However, it's with everyone else that this manga kinda didn't age well. Well, that and some portrayals of gay people looking like they are Mr. Slave from South Park, that also didn't age well. But with how over the top it is, and again how confident these S&M Freddie Mercury clones are of themselves, that I just think it honestly could be a lot worse. But everyone else is constantly throwing Ibari down and dropping lines that, well, they wouldn't be appearing in Western TV in 2021, I'll just say that. I'm normal, I like girls, this is said like twice. Again, the constant treating of Ibari as a he, which, to be fair, in the context it does come out as more of a denial thing from part of the family, and of course the absurd amount of times that they call Ibari and every gay character a pervert, with Kosaku constantly saying that he won't let her drag him into the world of pervertedness. Now, the reason why I'm willing to forgive this treatment is because it is never shown as right, but it's also never shown as wrong either, so it's very ambiguous in that front. If I'm reading and I'm siding with Ibari and thinking that she should remain as she is, I'm willing to bet a lot of kids from the 80s who originally read this manga probably sided with Kosaku and Ibari's father in thinking that she should just drop it. The ending doesn't help decide things for either side, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So, in terms of this topic, just do have in mind that it is a bit ambiguous, and if Ibari is a great trans character, everyone else definitely came out of the 80s. Now, that's all cool and all, but is the manga itself good? Can I use the ambiguous card again? No? Okay. Ibarikun is a gag manga, a very old gag manga, and that comes with two very big problems. One is that most of the settings are kinda overdone already in other better gag and rom-com manga, and the other is that there's definitely a lot of jokes that I don't get because I'm not a kid in Japan in the early 80s. There are, however, a lot of jokes that are understandable, and I'm willing to say there's at least one or two that are funny per chapter, which isn't that bad of a ratio per se. On the other hand, there's a barrage of jokes, and some of them are really bad, and they're reused a lot, and it drains you. Some of them are so bad that they are funny, but it's overall more miss than hit. The story itself and the characters are easily the best part of the manga. I find Ibari very likable, and there's a myriad of fun supporting characters. Gosaku has a cool growth throughout the series in how he sees Ibari, and how he slowly starts accepting her more and liking her more, even if he doesn't realize it. And there's characters like Jun, a lesbian girl who likes Ibari, who only appears for just a couple of chapters but definitely makes them so much better. And then there's bad characters. Like the dude whose entire joke was that he was an upperclassman and he kept appearing on the school activities. And it wasn't funny at first, and it wasn't funny at the 100th. But the worst character in this entire manga is one Isaishi Eguchi. Now, that name may or may not be familiar to you, but if you check the name of the mangaka, you'll notice that it's the exact same. And before I criticize this point, I need you to know a thing about me. I love fourth wall breaking jokes. I just do. Every time I see a character acknowledging that they need to rush because the episode is ending, I laugh. I laugh like a baby who just saw his mother's face appear from another pair of ends. I'm the kind of guy who thinks Deadpool is peak comedy. And I know it's not that funny, but for me it is. So why? Why is the fourth wall breaking comedy in Ibarikun not just the worst thing in the manga, but the worst thing in manga in general? I have as much rage for these jokes as I do for Jonathan Joestar. That may not mean a lot to you, but I can assure you that is a lot of rage. And there are funny fourth wall breaking jokes here, but they are so rare and there are so many that it just breaks me. It really does. Every time I see the author's avatar pop up, I want to punch him, and it just doesn't pop up. There are chapters where we have 2, 3, 4 pages of just him. Not the story, just him making jokes about editors and the fact that he hates deadlines, and it's bad. It's really, really, really bad. It feels like the author wants to make the story about himself, and there are good biographical manga, but they aren't inserted in other manga. I just want to read Ibarikun, not Eguchi-kun. Sorry, I don't care about your alligator jokes with your editors. Just show me if they're going to see Ibari's chest or not. Please. And by the way, chapter 52, it's just him. There's no Ibari, there's no story, it's just him. I want to punch him so bad. And Eguchi, I do have a question. If you know how to draw really well, why don't you? Seriously, the manga covers of the complete edition are fantastic. The chapter covers are fantastic. It shows Ibari in really fashionable styles. A lot of them clearly influenced by Boy George, which is fitting, and Cyndi Lauper, which I'm all for. I love Cyndi Lauper. But most of the manga, however, looks bad. And it's not bad as in bad art. The mangaka again clearly knows how to draw well, and he draws a very simplistic but readable and sometimes cute style which fits the gag genre. But he also draws a lot of these ugly, huge headed characters. Like 90% of the manga is in this style, and it's just so ugly, and I don't know. I've read Dr. Slump and it's the exact same, and both series ran around the same time, so maybe it was just the style of the time. Or maybe Eguchi was just simply inspired by Dr. Slump itself. But Toriyama's chibi characters look very cool and aesthetic in a way that Eguchi's really don't. Finally, the ending, of course. And from the side notes, I can tell that Eguchi just gave up on the manga due to not handling the harsh deadlines of Jump, and so the manga abruptly ends on chapter 53. Eguchi never really drew that one, thinking it was going to be the last, but it was and has been since 1983. And since then, he mentioned that he doesn't mind leaving it as it is. And taking a moment from my rage bit on Eguchi, this really does give a better look at some stuff he did. Again, Ibarikun chapters went out of their way to give us some fourth wall breaking jokes about not dealing with deadlines. And they weren't just jokes. These deadlines can break a lot of mangaka, and I deeply respect all that work in that regime. No matter how bad a manga is, there's always a lot of effort put into it. And the final chapter works. I don't want to spoil it, but thematically it serves as a pretty decent open-ended finale. It's not the best, and most things don't get resolved for obvious reasons, but the final chapter is actually a recall to the first, So it does work. But of course that comes with a problem when having in mind again the representation of the LGBT community. An ending where Ibari gave up and went back to being a boy would definitely end up being a misguided and bad portrayal of trans people as just a phase, or something to be corrected. And an ending where everyone accepted Ibari for who she is would definitely serve as a great and progressive manga about how we should accept trans people for who they are instead of trying to mold them to the norms. As it stands, however, Ibari-kun doesn't have any message in favor or against trans. It just shows a trans person living with people who want to change her for a bit, and then it ends. Ibari-kun is an interesting manga to read if you have in mind when it came out and some of its themes, but overall, it's not the best. At the end of the day, it's a gag manga that likes jokes that are generally funny, but it's not without some merit. And the story, for how short it is, can definitely be enjoyable at times. But if you want more LGBT manga recommendations, last year I made 5 of them. One of them is Ibari-kun, but there are another 4, so if you want to check them out, you can click the video on the left. And if you watched until here, thank you very much, and I'll see you next video.